Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from Rouse IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up daily edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 18th of August 2022. The article which we shall take up today have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion.
The question for this week's mains answer writing practice has already been uploaded on the eLearn, the link to which can be found in the description of the video. The question for this week is, floating solar power plants are gaining currency in India. Identify the benefits associated with this form of renewable energy source. State whether this source of energy has some limitations or not. The answer has to be written in 250 words, and all those people who will upload their answers on the eLearn platform by Saturday will get it evaluated from us. So the first article which we have taken has appeared on page number 7. The Centre versus State tussle over IAS postings. This article has been written in reference to an admittance made by Government of India, where they have said that fewer and fewer All India Services officers working in states were coming forward to opt for a tenure with the centre. So we know that All India Service officials are shared between central government and state governments. They are selected, chosen by the centre, but then they are allocated to specific state cadres. They serve a stint there, and then depending upon the willingness of the centre and these officers, they serve for varying stints at the central, especially at the policy making level. But this trend is observing a decline, and this is also becoming a flashpoint between centre and the state and causing a lot of trouble for India's federal structure, because in some cases central government wants a lot of officers which state governments are not yielding to. In some instances, the officers want to join the central force, but they are not being released or relieved by the state governments. And this topic has already been taken up in the DNS. But what has not been taken in the DNS is the major challenges facing these All India services and the avenues for reform as recommended by the second ARC. All other points raised by the author in this article are not at all pertinent to the demands of our examination, where the author talks about various posting options for IPS, IAS, and then talks about civil services examination, how many people apply, how many people are selected, and that is quite irrelevant. But we can utilize this opportunity to cover this topic. So let's now focus our attention to the major challenges which are facing our bureaucracy and especially All India services, and they broadly can be categorized into 5 sets: systemic rigidities, political interference, them being too generalistic, disproportionate representation of English medium among the selected candidates, and lack of openness and dynamism. And we are going to take up all these issues one by one, starting with systemic rigidities. Systemic means something which is in the system, which is a part of the system, and rigidity means something which is unable to be bent or to be forced out of shape or simply inflexible. And our bureaucracy, especially All India services, are infamous for their systemic rigidities or their inability to change or adapt to the changing realities. And that is because of the over-centralization of our bureaucracy. The over-centralization in the policy and management structures within which the civil service functions are too complex and often too constraining as well. Now, when you look at any new policy or scheme, more often than not, that policy or this scheme will have its genesis at the secretary level or at the ministerial level and not at the grassroots level. Now, for some cases, for some problems, for some challenges, you might need a universal scheme with common set of parameters and features across the country, but for most of the problems which our country facing, they are regional in nature, and hence over-centralization complicates the problem too much. And it is one of the reasons behind the rigidities, because the top to bottom approach is adopted where very few number of people are making the policy for all the people at the base of the pyramid. And to compound it, the size and number of ministries and departments have both overloaded the decision making and have diminished the capacities of the individual civil servants to fulfill their operational responsibilities. If you look at any ministry, there is a level of secretary who is the top official representing the bureaucracy in that particular department, then that person is subordinated by a lot of additional secretaries. Then comes the level of joint secretaries, beneath which you have another position. And so you can see within each ministry you have three levels of All India Services officers and bureaucratic staff overloading the decision making structure. And since India follows a rule based system where each and every decision has to be signed by one person, and that person becomes accountable and legally accountable for that particular order or decision, this slows down the process, because signing on a document requires a comprehensive study of the document, because it might lead to future liabilities which might create problem in their service career. Then comes the issue of political interference, which almost every department and every service is facing. There has been regular political interference in the functioning of civil servants to further narrow political agenda, which of course undermines the public welfare at large. Fear of transfer and lure of promotion and lure of posting in a powerful, this is within quotes, powerful department, because you must know that there are a lot of departments which are considered more relevant, more useful and more powerful as compared to other departments. And this could be because of various reasons, starting from the avenues of corruption to commanding power over in general decision making within the government departments. And so generally the departments like home, finance, infrastructure, agriculture, they have been considered to be more powerful as compared to other departments like Department of Culture and so on. And since all these things are more or less governed by the political executive, it provides a leeway, it provides a leverage to the political executives over the permanent or the bureaucratic executives, which enables the political interference. Then All India Services, especially the IAS, Indian Administrative Services, are facing the wrath of being labelled as too generalist in their nature. It is alleged that after their entry into the services, these officers never ever resort a domain and try to specialize and try to gain higher intellectual and academic advancements in those fields. And it is essential to have people with specialized skills and domain expertise in important position, as policymaking is of course all about having the highest domain knowledge in that particular field. So if a person is coming up with a draft bill on privacy, and if that person is not well versed with the knowledge of law combined with how digital marketplaces and how internet tech giants operate, that policy will not be effective. And that is why you need domain expertise and specialized knowledge at the highest level of policy making. And that is one of the major challenges being faced by All India Services. Then another trend which has emerged in past 20 years is the disproportionate representation of people who have studied through English medium. Now this trend of course is worrying, because it automatically means that people who are completing their education in regional languages like Tamil, like Kannadiga, like Hindi, they are not successfully making it to the final list as often as people who are writing the examination and completing their education in English medium. It's not to say that people who are completing their education through English medium are inferior or they're not as good as policy makers, but it clearly shows a class bias. It shows that people who have access to capital to be able to complete their education from convent schools or from English medium schools have better chances of making it to the final list, and leaving out 90% of the population who's still pursuing their education, school education, college education in regional languages, which is not the bias which you would expect in a body of 5,000 to 6,000 bureaucrats, which is going to decide the policy for the country. And then finally, our bureaucracy is marred with lack of openness. And this is clearly reflected in the culture of secrecy or closeness rather than culture of openness, which is what is expected, especially in the era of right to information. At the same time, civil servants are found to be hesitant towards collaborative governance, which is all about collaborating with civil society, private sector, think tanks, universities, and other global institutions. They have grave mental roadblock when it comes to this collaborative approach, which is what is needed for policy making, which best serves the purpose. And then The last major challenge which they are facing is the lack of dynamism. It has been pointed out that the civil services in India is more concerned with the internal process than with the results. So the complete focus of most of the officers is on following the procedure, following the process, and not on what that process or that procedure is meant for. And so too much of an emphasis on process distorts the whole dynamism of the services because everything becomes rule bound. All of us agree that there is a strong perception of the civil servants that they resist change as they are wedded to their privileges and prospects and thereby have become ends in themselves. And so these are 5 important challenges with the civil services in India is facing right now, especially the All India services. And so all these challenges clearly indicate that there is a need for some major reforms, and these major reforms are not only limited to the service tenure, but they deal with recruitment, training once the recruitment is complete, autonomy, and some of the measures to improve efficiency and accountability during their service. Now, these recommendations are based on second ARC report titled as Personal Management. So we'll begin our discussion with recruitment because reforms are required in the field of recruitment of civil servants so that the right people could be recruited who can ensure smooth functioning of democracy. And so in this regard, 2 of the recommendations of the second ARC are very, very pertinent. First is about constituting National Institute of Public Administration or NIPA, which should be established to run bachelor's degree in public administration and governance. Not just that, selected central and other universities should also be assisted to offer graduate level programs in these courses, which will produce graduates to further expand the pool of eligible applicants to civil services. These graduates would be eligible for appearing in the civil services examinations. Then apart from that, our years of experience has made us realize that state level officials who are selected through provincial services examinations or PCS have pool of some of the best officers that we have in our country, but because they were not selected through UPSC civil services examination, it takes around on an average 15 to 18 years for them to be promoted to all India services, and that is where we need to smoothen and enhance their promotion process and make it time bound so that if they are really good, they should be promoted to all India services like IAS, IPS and IFS within 5 to 8 years and not be holding back their talents and enable their time bound promotion in 15 to 18 years, which is just about killing the talent. So by carrying out these 2 measures, you will have supply of fresh talent coming directly from graduates of PubAd and governance from National Institute of Public Administration, and then you will also have access to the best talent from the state cadres who are serving the state governments in the form of provincial services. Then the next important arena of reform is about training. Training of civil servants, we know, should be able to bring about behavioral and attitudinal changes. And for that, 2 important recommendations are: so we already have National Training Policy for Civil Services 2012, but there is no monitoring mechanism to oversee the implementation of these policies because you know that there are around 20 to 25 central institutes for the training of all India services. Now these premier institutes deal with the training of police officers, revenue services, railway officers, audit services and various other services which are designed to cater to both central as well as state governments. But the level of the training which should be imparted, the expected level of honing of the skills required for that requisite field is something which has been laid down in the policy, but there is no mechanism to ensure the monitoring of the policy's implementation. And then second aspect is what we have talked about specialization. It's about domain knowledge, which should be the main purpose of mid-career opportunities. So once the civil servants, especially all India services, have completed around 8 to 10 years of service of general administration at the district level, and once they are about to move to the secretariat level where the real policy making is done, there the focus should be about acquiring domain knowledge or specialization, where the public servant should be encouraged to obtain higher academic qualification. And in this regard, Administrative Reform Commission recommends that all India service officers once graduating or having served their district posting should be allowed to choose three domains. So for example, a person A chooses health, education, and let's say finances. Now, remaining of the 20 to 25 years of his or her service will be served only in health, education, and finance for next 10 years, where the person will be expected to choose one where rest of the 5 to 7 years will be served. And in that way, when that person reaches the highest level of posting in their department, they already have very rigorous knowledge about their own field, be it health, education, or finance. But right now, what you see at the secretariat level is that people being transferred from health department to finance, from finance to revenue, from revenue to defense, without having any requisite specialized knowledge of that particular ministry or department. Then comes a very important aspect which we have already talked about, which is still a major challenge, which is autonomy of the bureaucrats, where the second ARC has suggested that there is a need to safeguard the political neutrality and impartiality of the civil services. The onus for this lies equally on political executive as well as the public servants themselves, and hence these aspects of neutrality and impartiality should be included in the amended code of ethics for ministers as well as code of conduct for the public servants. We already know that there exists a code of ethics, a set of broad do's and don'ts. At the same time, there exists a code of conduct for public servants, again a set of do's and don'ts, but going into very detailed do's and don'ts for public servants. For example, what is the amount of gift they can accept, how they can use the government vehicle, what is the procedure to inherit a property, all these sets where the neutrality and impartiality do not find their place. Of course, just finding a place would not ensure neutrality and impartiality and hence ensuring autonomy, but writing something down on a piece of paper in a form of rules and regulation is a good starting point. Apart from that, the second ARC has recommended that each department and ministry should undertake a review of the particular service of which it is a cadre controlling authority to ensure that officers of the service are used optimally, promotion prospects for them are adequate, and skill levels of officers are upgraded periodically. So for example, the cadre controlling authority for Indian Police Service is Home Ministry. For Indian Revenue Service, it's Finance Ministry. So periodically, these ministries should carry out review of all the officers, their working conditions, the duties that they are serving, their career progression, their skill enhancement while they are in service. What is the pressure? What are the pressures that they are facing from other ministries and departments? That is going to go a long way in ensuring the autonomy of these services. Then comes the important aspect of both efficiency as well as accountability. So efficiency is about being productive, how much of the work you are getting done which was allocated or expected of you. And so in this regard, there have been a lot of committees, for example, HOTA Committee, Expenditure Reforms Commission, 5th Central Pay Commission, and 2nd ARC, all of them have recommended the downsizing of all India services. There is a need to optimize the size of the government machinery. All of them have emphasized on drastic downsizing of the government staff strength for securing modern and professional governance and also reducing the increasing salary bill for the government of India. But when it comes to accountability, which is about these government servants being held responsible for their actions, changes have been suggested under Article 311, which is the current regime which we have already seen in the introduction, which protects all India service people. Changes have been suggested for conducting disciplinary proceedings against the government servants. It was also recommended that offering of bribes should be made a substantive offense. This next article again appears on page number 6. This maritime partnership still a work in progress. So it is far from the clear, according to the author, whether India-US ties are headed towards a comprehensive partnership in the Indian Ocean littorals. And so the author concludes that a lot of foundational agreements, although signed, does not indicate the India-US maritime relationship is scaling heights, but rather it is more or less a work in progress. There has doubtless been some movement ahead, but it is far from clear whether Navy to Navy ties are headed towards a wide ranging and comprehensive partnership, especially in Indian Ocean region. Now, in this regard, from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains, it is important for us to understand these foundational agreements. What do we understand by LEMOA? What do we understand by BECA? And there are 2-3 others as well. But apart from that, the views expressed by the author are not much pertinent to us, but we can utilize this opportunity to understand these concepts. Let us now begin the discussion.
Starting with GSOMIA and ending at BECA. So these set of 4 agreements which United States signs with its defense partners are known as foundational agreements. So in this particular discussion, we will understand that what is the significance of signing of these 4 set of foundational agreements between India and United States, how it is reflective of increasing trust between the two countries, and what are the challenges which these two nations still need to resolve in order to make full use of these foundational agreements. In the course of discussion, we will also understand what these agreements denote and what are the practical utilities of each one of them. Let us start by first understanding that as soon as the two nations come closer as far as the defense ties are concerned and their national interests converge or they align together, how is it reflected in their defense ties? So of course, if a country A is technologically very advanced as compared to the country B, and if they are coming together, A is bound to sell a lot of defense equipments to country B, and if A does not trust B, then they would not sell, and for that they need to sign certain agreements. For example, some agreements which would make it impossible for the country B to give access to country C to the defense equipments which have been sold by country A. Of course, because country A doesn't want these technologies to be transferred to country C, that is a kind of first level of development or the building up of trust between these two nations. Once that is done, of course, the next stage would be to design a common communication platforms or the systems which will enable seamless transaction of information to and fro from A and B. Of course, that should be encrypted, which should not be accessible to any adversary of either A or either B. And so that has to be chalked out in a form of an agreement. Let's say that is also done. Then the third stage of building trust as far as defense ties are concerned is use of common facilities. And that is very tricky, because if B is going to use, let's say, a defense airport or a naval port of a country A, of course, they will get to know and to learn a lot of things which A might consider as secret. For example, if an Indian Air Force pilot visits an aircraft carrier of United States, they are going to look into the functioning of aircraft, what technologies do they have, and everything. And so there needs to be a level of trust so that the information learned by B are not transferred to any other adversary. And finally, the epitome of trust comes, or the final destination of defense ties is the sharing of real-time intelligence. That could be geospatial intelligence, that could be ground level intelligence, any kind of intelligence if it is shared between two countries on a real time basis. For example, if CIA comes to know about some terrorist movement in other country, if they think it is relevant to India, they are sharing it, and there is a trust, and vice versa from India. If that happens, these two countries would be an ideal defense partners. That does not happen, but the signing of these 4 agreements definitely shows an increasing level of trust between India and United States. So let us now go over quickly through these agreements and what they mean in practical reality. So starting with GSOMIA, or General Security of Military Information Agreement, which was signed between India and United States in 2002. So that was the first agreement or first foundational agreement as far as defense ties are concerned. And what it did was that enabled the exchange as well as protection of classified military secret among these two countries, which is India and United States. Now in 2019, Another agreement similar to this was signed, which was Industrial Security Annex. So these two are similar. The difference is that the agreement signed in 2002 enabled the transfer and the sale of military secret from government to government. So if government of United States authorizes a military secret to be transferred to the military or the government of India, that was allowed. But the sale from private to private was not allowed, which was done in 2019. So this was the first set of agreement. Now what it will do in reality, or how it will change the scenario? So it will enable greater industry to industry collaboration for co-production and co-development in defense sector. And so a company of India can come up with joint collaboration with a company of United States, and they can co-produce a fighter jet, which was not possible earlier. So that is one, and we discussed that of course is the basic level of understanding between the two nations. And so the next set of cooperation would involve operational cooperation, which means that collaboration and cooperation as far as missions are concerned. It may deal with servicing, it may deal with refueling or any other service, and that is operationalized through the next agreement, which is called LEMUA, or Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement. So that is logistical exchange is enabled through this particular agreement, which allows militaries of US and India to replenish, access supplies, as well as to access servicing in land facilities, at air bases, and as well as using their ports. So for instance, US Navy's P-8 aircraft landed in Port Blair just last month for refueling, and that was because the countries had signed LEMUA. Of course, in the absence of such an agreement, this was possible, but that was troublesome and it required very high level of clearances. But now this process of utilizing each other common bases has been automated. Now LEMUA was signed in 2016, and you can understand that signing of LEMUA means that the partner trusts the other enough to expose its own valuable assets to the other party. Because when you are going into air bases and ports, you're of course exposing your secret technology and exposing your methods of operations to the other side as well. And so it requires a level of trust. So after the utilization of each other's facilities, the next level of trust comes from the development of secure communication, and to be able to use that communication to convey the information, which was operationalized through COMCASA, which was signed and operationalized in 2018. Now this particular agreement has allowed Indian forces to procure advanced secure communication equipments from US. And you should know that such equipment were earlier denied to be used by India, even for the defense equipments being manufactured in United States. So we know that India has purchased C-17s, C-130s, all these are American made, and they also have communication network. But when India purchased them, the communication systems from them were removed, and India had to go to the open market to deploy a similar communication system. But now since India has signed this agreement, India will be able to procure encrypted communication system which US itself uses. And so now a communication through secure network which is encrypted will be enabled. This means that America is confident that it can rely on encrypted systems to connect the two militaries, air force as well as navies. This will also provide seamless connectivity between militaries of America as well as India if or ever they have to conduct a joint operation. And then of course the final and the pinnacle of defense cooperation is BECA, which enables exchange of geospatial information. So there are satellites deployed by America as well as India, which provide information which is not only used for navigation but also for targeting, for intelligence. But so far we don't have access to American geospatial intelligence. But with BECA, we have access to highly classified information, and that too in real time. So for example, if there is an American drone moving over Iraq, and if we want access after the signing of BECA, we can have access to those images. And what obviously that means is that the precision of our targeting systems, for example the missiles, the drones, will be very effective and their efficacy will improve because of high resolution images, the coordinates and the locations of the targets enhanced and their reliability has increased due to added input from American systems. Obviously, we know that this was signed just last week in 2020. So you can see that over a passage of 2 decades, how close India and America have grown as far as defense ties are concerned, and that is reflective of the increasing trust among these two nations. So now we understand that what these agreements mean, and we know that currently United States is the most powerful and technologically advanced military nation. And these agreements govern the nature and the scope of American defense partnerships. Through these agreements, partners get access to the most advanced weapons, and at the same time, America gets access to the remote places. So for example, through these agreements, the capability of United States to patrol Indian Ocean and South China Sea has drastically increased. Of course, it is beneficial for India as well. And so, these agreements are clearly reflective of increasing India-US defense cooperation. It started with GSOMIA, then came Civil Nuclear Agreement of 2005, and then finally BECA of 2020. And so, the defense cooperation has been advancing at a rapid pace. We also know that US has relaxed restrictions on technology trade in India's favor considerably, and it designated India as a major defense partner. And somewhere it is also indicative of convergence of common vision between India and America as far as Indo-Pacific region is concerned, where both countries along with Japan and Australia are increasing their military cooperation. Most of these countries ultimately use defense weapons manufactured by America, be it Japan or Australia. And so US built platforms used by partner countries which can talk to each other, which can operate each other facilities and share the common operational information will go a long way in countering the increasing influence of China in Indo-Pacific region. But this is easier said than done. There are challenges which have the potential to destroy the level of trust which have been built up between US and India. And let us discuss those challenges. So the first challenge comes from India's huge, big, massive dependence on Russia. Most of our defense equipments even now are sourced from Russia. They use Russian communication systems, they use Russian technology. And so a lot of commentators believe that increasingly close ties with America may limit India's choices. Because the closer we get to United States, more and more equipments will be sourced from United States, and the conditions put by US may further make it very difficult for India to source its equipments from Russia, because after all, US is very particular about the integrity and safety of its networks. And if India continues to persist with the closer defense ties with Russia, it may not go down well with United States. And so these agreements might not be as fruitful as it is being projected right now. And the second challenge comes from the inhibitions which India has due to American dependence and its high level of collaboration with Pakistan, especially in matter of Afghanistan. We know that geostrategically the position of Pakistan is such that it can always leverage it to get a better deal from United States. We know that America wants to get out of Afghanistan, and that urgency of America is being fully exploited by Pakistan. And so India is extremely wary of Pakistan's deep-rooted ties with Pentagon, and India knows the kind of dependence which Washington has on Pakistan to access Afghanistan, and Pakistan at any point of time can leverage this locational superiority to become a big roadblock. But the only common factor which people believe will keep the India-US collaboration going in a positive direction is the emerging Chinese threat, especially in Indo-Pacific region, which they believe will supersede both of these suspicions. And that is what the topic of the next discussion is as well, which is on militarization of Quad and inclusion of Australia into Malabar exercises. So as far as foundational agreements are concerned, you should be clear in your mind as to what these mean. What are the full forms and the practical applications of these different agreements? And what are the challenges which might come in the way of full implementation of?
The geopolitics of the fourth Taiwan crisis appears on page number 6. So all of us has seen how in past 2 weeks, China has been conducting the defense drill all around the Taiwan to project its claim on the self-projected independent island. Now, this would be fourth such power projection by China on Taiwan, given the Western influence on the island. And all of this was triggered by high-profile visit indeed of American leader Nancy Pelosi to the island, not providing any kind of attention to the warnings by China, and this has irked China. Now, from the perspective of mains examination under GS paper 2, we already know that there is a line in the syllabus which says India and its neighborhood relations, an effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests, and this particular crisis fits in both of them. Taiwan crisis is something which directly impacts our relationship with our biggest and the most powerful neighbor, which is China. Also, this crisis involves one of the most developed and powerful countries of the globe, which is USA, and hence, just like the conflict between US and Russia impacts India, conflict between US and China also impacts India. And hence, it is important for us to understand the history of China-Taiwan relations, how Taiwan came into existence, and what is the reason for current heightened aggression of China in this crisis. And in order to understand that, we will first have to understand why the relationship between China and Taiwan is so complicated, and this complication has its roots in the history. Not very far back, but around 70 years ago, in 1949. So if you know, after the Communist Revolution, Communist Party of China, or CPC, occupied the mainland China. So the mainland China is what you see on the screen, but when they occupied it, there was already a nationalist government ruling a significant portion of Chinese territory, which was known by the name of Kuomintang. They were nationalists as opposed to communists. So although they fought the Japanese occupation together and they were in association, but you know that nationalists and communists cannot coexist. And of course, in that era, communists came down heavily on the nationalists after they had defeated Japanese. That's a part of world history. But after the Chinese Communist Party occupied the mainland China, the Kuomintang government had to fled, and they fled to Taiwan, which was then known as Formosa Island, and they set up a government over there. At the same time, a significant portion of today's China is Tibet, which was then under a Buddhist order government with practically no military and devoid of any arms. And because of which, it became a problem of sovereignty and legitimacy for the government of the China headquartered in Beijing. Because at the same time, you have a government in Beijing claiming this government is the legitimate Chinese government, but at the same time you have a government in Taiwan claiming that they are the successor of real Chinese state, and so China adopted one China policy, under which it said that all the countries which enter into a diplomatic relation with China, or which want to trade with China, or which want to have relations with China, all such countries will have to recognize that there is only one China, the one which is headquartered at Beijing, and there is no other China. And Tibet as well as Formosa or Taiwan are nothing but a state or provinces of China. And slowly and gradually, all the countries of the world recognize one China policy, and that is why Taiwan still is not a designated state by United Nations. So for example, even now India does not have a formal relation with Taiwan at the ambassador level. We have created some informal mechanisms to carry out trade that China allows, but not formal embassy level relations or formal diplomatic relations. And so it became the motto of the Chinese government in Beijing to unify the country by occupying Tibet and Formosa. So in case of Tibet, we already know they did it immediately after 1949, because of which Dalai Lama had to fled to India, and that soured our relation with China because we provided refuge or political asylum to a person who directly questioned the legitimacy of Chinese government by not recognizing its rule over Tibet. But China has still to occupy Taiwan, which is its long-term project. Whether it will be able to do that or not is something which we'll come to know later on. Now, in order to accommodate Taiwan's concern, Chinese government floated one country, two systems rule, which is also, by the way, applicable in case of Hong Kong, but it is being increasingly diluted. Now, if you want to understand Hong Kong scenario, you should go and watch this DNS, but we'll keep ourselves limited to Taiwan, under which it said that Taiwan, if it merges itself with the China, the democratic government will be allowed to function and there will be no threat to the rights of the people being enjoyed in Taiwan, because we know that Chinese people under a communist state do not enjoy the rights which are enjoyed, for example, by you or me. Why this scenario has flared up in past 10 days? Because of visit of a very high profile delegation from US to Taiwan. Now, when do you send a delegation to a country? When you want to increase, when you want to enhance relationship, when you want to upgrade that nation's status. And if you want to visit a country, you will have to take permission from the government over there in form of visa. And this is what has become a sticking point. China says that Taiwan is under Chinese control. And so when US directly wants to enhance its relationship with Taiwan, that directly conflicts with the legitimacy of the Chinese state. And so China has threatened a war against Taiwan. By looking at the preparation, it is very, very difficult to say that there will be no war. In fact, there are very, very high chances of Chinese attack on Taiwan and ultimate capture. So how does it impact India and Chinese relationship? It impacts India-Chinese relationship because India has, just like all other states with formal diplomatic relation with China, India has accepted one China policy. India accepts the sovereignty of China over Taiwan, and that is why India has still to recognize Taiwan as a proper state. And that is why you do not have Taiwan embassy in India and Indian embassy in Taiwan. But they have devised other kinds of mechanisms. But India and Taiwan have devised other kinds of mechanisms to carry out governmental and non-governmental associations. But the problem is that just like India has accepted one China policy, India expects China to follow one India policy. Because India believes that when India has accepted the claim of China over Taiwan, China should also accept India's claim over Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And this is where the problem or the trouble begins, because China has never ever accepted these regions as part of India. For example, just the last year, China announced that it does not accept Ladakh as a union territory. It did not pay heed to India's objections to construction of road in Gilgit-Baltistan region. Whenever Indian ministers, prime ministers, delegates visit Arunachal Pradesh, China issues very stern diplomatic dispatches. China has blocked foreign funding for development projects in Arunachal Pradesh, claiming it to be disputed, and China has directly or indirectly supported insurgency in Northeast. That is what you call state and non-state actors. So the question is, should India change its stand on one China policy? This is something which I want you to write in the comment section. Is the time now to reject one China policy and designate Taiwan as a separate state? But what has changed in past 1 month, because of which a military confrontation looks very real? And the reason behind that are 4. The first reason is that this visit of Nancy Pelosi, despite strict Chinese warnings, is a direct challenge to China's one China policy, because of which China believes that it's now time to teach these nations like US, UK, France, Germany a lesson. Then China has of course seen what has happened in Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine because it perceived Ukraine as increasingly becoming closer to Europe and might becoming a part of NATO. But when Russia resorted to military action, what was the response of NATO and West? There was no military action but only economic sanctions. And since China is sitting on such a pile of foreign exchange reserve, and since it is a global manufacturing hub, it will be very, very difficult for the nations to cut off China as they have cut off Russia. Then we have seen in past 5 to 10 years increasing defense partnerships in Indo-Pacific in the form of Quad, in the form of Malabar exercises, supply of arms and ammunitions and air force equipments to Taiwan. And 4th one is impact of COVID on Chinese economy. We have seen that in past 1 or 2 years, like all other economies of the world, Chinese economy has been impacted, as a result of which the kind of economic gains which people observed in past 2 decades have not been observed, and it looks like that Chinese economy is going to crumble under the pressure of increasing debt. And that is where Communist Party feels or might feel that there is a need to rake up the nationalist issue to divert the attention of the people, and that could also be one of the reasons which has been suggested a major cause behind raking up this issue of Taiwan. Now, as far as the current Taiwan Strait crisis goes, China has conducted intensive defense drill after the state visit to Taiwan by the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. China is more intensive due to, first and foremost, falling hegemony of US as seen of course in its failure in Arab world, inability to defend Ukraine, and falling influence in Eastern Europe. Then of course in past 10 to 20 years we have seen the rise of military capability of China. Apart from that, China-Russia bonhomie, their bonding after the disintegration of USSR is at the peak. And if there is one country which has backed Russia throughout in Ukraine crisis, that is China. An expansive economic development of China has provided it with the financial heft. Sitting on the largest pile of the foreign exchange reserve, China surely has the wherewithal to counter the sanctions which shall be imposed in the wake of any attack on Taiwan. Then of course China has established its clear-cut military hegemony in South China Sea with its naval deployment as well as construction of artificial islands. An inability of rising powers such as India, Saudi Arabia or Australia to take lead in Indo-Pacific are some of the reasons which can explain the current aggressive stance of China. Data opportunity at G20 is an article which has appeared on page number 7. So the upcoming G20 summit provides India an opportunity to use G20 as a viable platform to discuss data and particularly sharing and transferring of that data, given seemingly converging positions on data governance amongst major G7 powers and emerging economies as the state finds a greater role in regulating data. So the upcoming G20 summit provides India an opportunity to use G20 as a viable platform to discuss data, particularly sharing and transfer, given the fact that there is a convergence of positions on data governance amongst G7 powers and also emerging economies. And so this is a good news. This article focuses upon how data impacts geopolitics. Basically it impacts the environment in which diplomats operate. It brings new topics of negotiations on the policy making tables. And also, it provides diplomat with new tools to make diplomatic activities more efficient and effective. But that is not our concern. Our concern is what are the domains? What are the fields of data governance? What are the issues which you have to focus upon when we talk about data governance? And as you can clearly see on the screen, there's a beautiful image covering the 4 important dimensions of technology, economy, law and human rights, as well as security. So whenever you have to answer a question on data governance and public policy, which is about data, these are the 4 components which you cannot forget. And let us understand these 4 dimensions one by one. So of course, any discussion and any regulation on data governance cannot go without technology, where the focus should be on developing standards, applications and services for data management. When we talk about concerns, the concerns are huge, which talk about fragmentation of data space due to lack of data interoperability and limited access to data. Especially when we talk about the public sector, the data maintained by one department is absolutely, in most cases, unusable to the another department. And that is why you need standardization bodies. Then comes the economic aspect of data governance, where the focus should be on use of data as the basis for the internet business model. So you must have heard the saying that if you're not being charged for using a product, you are the product. And since these giants like Facebook, Google, TikTok, they are using our data to earn revenues. That's why you are able to use these applications absolutely free of cost. And hence the concerns over there with respect to loss of trust by users if data is shared with governments without legal constraints. Increased privacy protection may reduce use of data and profit of internet companies. So a very fine balance has to be struck over there. And there the actors are internet companies, business associations, trade policy communities. Let us now come to the security, where the focus should be on use of data by governments for protection of national security and the fight against the crime. But the concerns are too strong encryption of data by industry and users can limit access to data and use of that data for security reasons, where the actors are security services, law enforcement agencies, Interpol and UNDOC. And finally, law and human rights. The field of law and human rights focuses upon protection of privacy, jurisdiction in transboundary data cases, but the concerns are immense. For example, speculations on mass surveillance, lack of protection of citizens' data due to limited jurisdiction, and here the actors are civil society, United Nations Human Rights Council, courts and academia. The next article, What is Causing Arctic Warming, appears on text and context page. So why is the Greenland ice sheet melting at an alarming rate? And why is this rate higher than the rate of melting at other places? So due to global warming, any change in the surface air temperature and the net radiation balance tends to produce larger changes at the north and south pole. And that is what is known as amplification. So let's say that this is a graph where on y-axis we are showing the increase in temperature as compared to pre-industrial levels. That is why it's plus T. And these are various locations. So if on an average the temperature has risen around 1.07 degrees Celsius, it has risen larger than 1.07 degrees Celsius at high latitudes, especially towards polar areas, as well as at high altitudes, which means Himalayan region and other mountainous regions as well. And this is what is known as amplification. Amplification of the warning at few places. And from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains, this concept is extremely important to be understood. So polar amplification is the phenomena that any change in the net radiation balance tends to produce a larger change in temperature near the poles than in planetary average, and this is commonly referred to as the ratio of polar warming to tropical warming. And this happens because of ice albedo feedback. So you see that to begin with you have a small level of warming which melts the sea ice. Now as soon as the sea ice, a small portion of sea ice has gone, there is a drastic reduction in the reflectivity and hence the albedo of that region. So for example, if this is the total area of the pole, which is all covered with the ice, and so we know that because of the high reflectance of the ice, almost everything, almost all the solar radiation which is falling on the surface is getting reflected, and hence there is very little, if there is any, absorption of the sunlight. But as soon as one of the regions of the sea ice melts, that is now water. Let's say this green color is water, but very bad choice of colors. But if this becomes water, then we can understand that now this green portion observes sudden increase in the amount of insolation being absorbed, which increases the absorbed sunlight, which then leads to further melting of the ice in surrounding areas. Now compare this to a tropical ocean, where to begin with there was no ice and there was already everything which was water. And so with increase in the temperature, there is not really any change in the nature of the surface with which the solar radiation is interacting, and hence the level of warming which you observe at other places will be lower, but at poles it will be higher. And similar is the case with the glaciated regions of Himalayan and Hindu Kush region, where when the ice melts, the bare rock is exposed and there is a drastic change in the insolation, and hence we have mountainous amplification as well. Next article which we have taken up has appeared as a column on page number 6, Finding a Home, which is based on a recent report, a review of guardianship laws by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Personal Public Grievances, Law and Policies. And it has observed 4 important issues related to child adoption. First and foremost, it observes that there is a huge gap between adoptable children and willing parents. As you can see on the screen, there is clearly a declining adoptions. Starting from 2010 to 2011, where around 5,693 kids were adopted. Compare it to 2021-22, where only 3,000 kids have been adopted. And this clearly shows that the adoption process is failing in our country. because between 2017 and 19, there was unusual surge in adoptive parents returning children after the adoption. 60% of all children returned were girls, 24% were children with special needs, and many were older than 6. And primary reason for the failure of adoption process is that older children, older than 6-8 years, take a lot of time to adapt to their new surroundings. Apart from that, children who are disabled or their disability is revealed later on, parents don't like them simply because of the special care and attention that they demand. Then rackets source children from poor or marginalized families and unwed women, and they are coaxed or misled into submitting their children to trafficking organizations from where they are adopted. Apart from that, one glaring problem with our laws is the exclusion of LGBTQ community. The minimum eligibility for a couple to adopt children is the proof of their marriage. Laws do not recognize the validity of people belonging to LGBT community and their marriages, and hence they legally cannot adopt children. In February 2021, while addressing petitions seeking the legal recognition for LGBTQ plus marriages, the government opined that these relationships could not be compared to the Indian family unit concept of a husband, a wife, and a children, and hence they were not in favor of legalizing these marriages. And so these are the 4 issues which point a finger towards declining trend of adoptions in India. Then this last news which we have taken has appeared on page number 3, which deals with the architecture of Lucknow or Awadh. Now it has come into news because one of the domes of the Bada Imambara fell yesterday and it is being repaired. Now from the perspective of prelims examination under art and culture, the question has already been asked, which is also, by the way, your question of the day. So Imambara literally means residence for the Imam. Especially the word stands for a house or an assembly hall built by the Shiites for observing Muharram. Throughout the month of Muharram, the first month of the Muslim calendar, as well as on other important occasions of Shiites, assemblies are held in the Imam Bada. While there are many Imam Badas in Lucknow, Bada Imam Bada or Ashfi Imam Bada is the most famous one. It is the second largest Imam Bada in India after Nizamat Imam Bada in Murshidabad. It is considered as a part of AWADHI Islamic architecture. It is believed that the construction of this grand building was started in 1785 when a devastating famine hit Awadh, and the Nawab's objective was to provide employment for the people, and so it was kind of Manrega in those days. It was built under the regime of Asaf-ud-Dawla, who was the Nawab of Awadh, and so we can see that its objective is to provide a place of worship for the Shiite Muslims. As far as the unique features of the architecture is concerned, it is known for its incredible maze, Bhul Bhulaiya, central hall of Imam Bada, which is said to be the largest arched hall in the world. Building is made of Lucknowi bricks. No wood or metal has been used in the construction, and within the complex of the Imam Bada there is Ashfi Mosque.